6:52 for you p.m., right, Maura?
Yes, indeed.
How's it going up there in New York?
Well, one, it's great to hear your voice, Michael, and it's wonderful to be on your show. And I really appreciate that you give me the opportunity to speak to your viewers and to the world at large. Well, right now in New York this week, as the doctors predicted, following the curve of Iran and Italy, the deaths are coming at 2 to 3 a minute in New York City, and there are body bags piled up in the corridors of almost all New York hospitals that are designated COVID hospitals. And they are building a pit in Central Park for the coffins because they're just overwhelmed and can't process the burial. And people are in absolute shock now that it's really here. Now that the CCP virus is taking away people that we love by the minute. And so as a New Yorker, I'm absolutely heartbroken. I'm in shock. I knew that the CCP would do something catastrophic that would affect the whole world. I had this strange vision in my hotel in Kathmandu, the Hotel Tibet, 8 years ago. But, well, no one will listen to us. Nobody cares. We've tried for years. We just can't get anybody to understand this is a criminal regime. So it's going to take a catastrophic event for people to look at the Tibet movement and the Falun Gong and the Tiananmen survivors and people like me and you and say, oh, my goodness, you were right. Wouldn't you agree, Michael?
Absolutely. Again, this is Maura Moynihan, and the famous Maura Moynihan. You've probably seen her on television and all over the place. And she grew up part of her life in India when her father was the U.S. ambassador to India, and that's where Maura got involved with the Tibet movement, and she's been on it since she's very young, and so. And then lived in all over, was in, we first met in Thailand, and then she was, lived for a time in Nepal, of course, in India. And so that's why Maura is very important to listen to. That's why we're very honored to have you on, Maura. I really want to hear what you have to say more than what I have to say. And Maura's in New York
Oh,
right
well,
now, by
thank
the way.
you.
She's in New York.
Yes, and to all your viewers out there, as I said previously on Michael's show, what's very important right now is to not be completely overwhelmed by the tragic and dreadful news of the deaths and the loss, and also the economic losses that Americans and people around the world are facing because of the Chinese Communist Party covering up this virus and allowing it to spread. What's very important is if you're quarantined at home and you have time, please follow my Twitter feed, Michael's Twitter feed, and also follow the narrative. The Chinese Communist Party has for years implanted its spies, its assets, and its spokespeople in all the major institutions of American and European society. And I've been posting all these articles as fast as I can get them. For example, Ivy League universities. I'm a graduate of Harvard. My father was a professor at Harvard. Harvard tops the list of all universities in America for taking donations from communist China, $1 billion. $1 billion. And several years ago, a Harvard professor of humanities wrote a very powerful article saying, why are we educating the sons and daughters of the Chinese Communist Party at the expense of American students? And they have. I was visiting friends in Cambridge last year, and I walked through Harvard Yard, and I'm almost, the majority of the undergraduate student body is Chinese. And I don't blame them for trying to get the best education that they can, but it is at the expense of American students, and it also means that they buy silence from Harvard University. You cannot have a conference about the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Falun Gong, the Tiananmen survivors. Just last fall in October at Columbia University, another one of it's one of the oldest universities in America. Alexander Hamilton went there when it was King's College. Well, we tried to organize a little Tibet conference and bringing in the Uyghurs and the Hong Kong people. An hour before the conference was due to start, Columbia University shut it down on orders from the Chinese Communist Party, from the Chinese consulate in New York. We put up a fight. They wouldn't back down. We ended up having it in February somewhere else. But that's the lengths to they will go. And they are now showing that the silence they bought from Western elites works. Because another thing I'm finding very, very alarming is the narrative in mainstream media. Not all. Fox has been much, much better. Certain internet sites are much, much better. But half the country watches Fox, the other half watches MSNBC. Rachel Maddow, as we've discussed before, she's toned it down a little bit this week, but, spewing Chinese communist talking points, filling people's ears with hate for the U.S. government, hate for the Army Corps of Engineers, for the doctors, for our military, who are also infected, as we discussed last time. She's toning it down a little, and now we find out, at the time, an excellent news source for information about the Chinese Communist Party. It's the Falun Gong operates it. They also have a new TV show called China in Focus. That's really good. They have a new documentary that premiered last night about how China created this crisis. Everyone should watch it. Well, anyway, back to the mainstream media, we find out that NBC News, the oldest television station in America, Meet the Press, that my father was a guest on a record 50 times, is the oldest political talk show in America.
Your dad was on Meet the Press 50 times.
Mm-hmm.
That was, I don't know if it still is, but that used to be one of the most important shows in the United States, right?
Yes, but Chuck Todd is doing a terrible job, and he parrots CCP propaganda, so it's fallen from grace.
Good Lord.
But it used to be very significant. Before the rise of the internet, there was just print TV and television, so people would tune in every Sunday to watch Meet the Press to find out what was going on. So anyway, NBC News has cut a bunch of deals with the Chinese Communist Party. It started in 2008 with the Beijing Olympics, because NBC Sports has the Olympic franchise. And they were getting ready for Beijing 2022. And the Epoch Times article, which I put on my website, and I sent to lots of people in media in New York, not one of them wrote back because I guess they're ashamed or they don't want to acknowledge it. They've hosted Chinese diplomats and Chinese Communist Party members at NBC studios at Rockefeller Center in New York. Everybody knows about the famous Rockefeller Center Christmas tree in New York, right? Haven't we all seen pictures, right, Michael?
Oh, yeah.
That's NBC News.
I've been writing about this for years. I remember last time we got together in Thailand, all we did was talk about, what China's doing. It's been like that since, but you've been on it. When was the first time you got arrested for this? 1994 in front of the Chinese embassy?
Yes.
That's a great picture, by the way. I wanted to put it, I think I already put it up once, but I want to make that my screensaver, actually, of you getting arrested. That's like 1994. Maura Moynihan, she's in New York right now, but she's a serious troublemaker for China. She was out protesting in front of their embassy in Washington in 1994. But didn't you say that the police were actually on your side, the American police?
Yes, the police were wonderful. And the reason I did that arrest, and it must be repeated again and again and again, to counter the narrative coming from ABC, NBC, CNN is a great offender, attacking the U.S. government, blaming Trump, saying he's responsible. One of my neighbors said, "Oh, Trump created this pandemic," and I said, "Are you out of your mind?" But that shows how effective
they're actually saying Trump created the pandemic.
Yeah. There's a hashtag called Trump's pandemic. Trump pandemic. A lot of people are saying he created it. He's responsible. That's the narrative that the Trump hating side of the media is promoting, because we're also in an election year, and they've got to sort of shore up all the money they wasted, the time they wasted with those insane impeachment hearings, which tied up the whole U.S. government while the pandemic was breaking and left America unprepared. I don't see anyone blaming Nancy Pelosi. They're all blaming Trump. And Trump put in the travel ban from China at the end of January. All the Democrats called him a racist xenophobe. They're not saying that now. And whether you voted for Trump or not, I mean, I'm a lifelong Democrat, is not the point. He's our commander-in-chief, and we don't want the United States to be utterly, completely destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party. Wouldn't you agree, Michael?
Oh, yeah. They always reach in their pocket and pull out the racist card when they don't have anything intelligent to say. I mean, that's just a standby. That's just a piece
Yeah.
of bait. And you know that. We've talked about that for years. I mean, it's just
Mhm.
reach in, throw the race grenade. But now the race grenade has gotten to the point, there's different types of hand grenades, by the way. There's a what's called an offensive sort of hand grenade that you can throw very far. It's small and it's made for going forward, right? There's a defensive hand grenade, which often are quite much larger, and you need to be behind cover before you throw it because it's the fragmentation range is the kill radius is so far. The race card has become like a defensive grenade. You can't throw it far enough without getting fragged. I mean, you throw that grenade, you better be behind cover. You know what I'm saying? We've gotten to the point where everybody that throws the race card anymore, it's like you got fragged by your own grenade. We don't buy it anymore. It washes back on them. Maura, I'm just so happy to have you on. What else is going on up in New York right now?
Well, another very disturbing development this morning, showing how the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, has gone into overdrive to control the narrative and to keep all these elites that they've bought and paid for on their side. The Asia Society of New York, it's on 70th and Park Avenue. It was started by the Rockefeller family at the turn of the last century because they were great collectors of Asian art and had a great interest in Asian culture and civilization and so forth. Well, ever since the Tiananmen Square massacre got put just put it on the back bench, and we weren't going to care about that. And that's why I got arrested, because Bill Clinton, with one stroke of the executive pen, removed the sanctions put on communist China after Tiananmen, which means they had to face an annual review of their human rights record before the United States Congress, before trade deals could go through. And that would have possibly this reform and change in China. But we'll never know, because thanks to Bill Clinton, there are at least 5, some people say 8 million human beings in concentration camps, mostly in Tibet and Xinjiang, the remote areas of Western China. There's a billion-dollar forced organ harvesting industry in China, and they take the organs from live prisoners, usually young political prisoners.
It was Epoch Times that broke that, Maura. Our friends at Epoch Times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Why is this of no concern to anybody? Well, because the CCP got normalized, and it all started when Bill Clinton did that. And so I saw the Asian society change radically in recent years. They've become so pro-CCT. I've been to so many functions there where there'd be a well-fed American banker up on the stage, angrily, almost spitting, saying, oh, these people make a fuss about human rights in China. Well, it's their country, and they should run it the way they want to. And we shouldn't be poking around and not making a fuss. And so I would, of course, at Q&A say, so you don't have a problem with human beings being tortured in concentration camps? What if it was your family? Of course, then they all get angry and I'm asked to leave, but I don't care. And so this morning,
people can't take you, Maura. People can't take you.
Mm-hmm.
People can't take you, because you're too high energy and you're too smart, and these things, and you're too dedicated. They can't take you. They try to pour baking soda on you for years.
Can't take the truth.
Oh yeah, listen. Yeah. I see people coming on my comments like, look how fired up Maura is. Even Steve Bannon sits back and warms his hands by the Maura fire. You watch Steve Bannon on Pandemic, and he'll be like, "Have you seen Maura come on?" He'll say stuff like that. If Steve Bannon's like, she's fired up, she's super smart, that's one heck of an endorsement. You should see her. You got to meet her in person sometime. It's like an act of God.
Well, Michael, I feel the same about you. Michael and I bonded instantly years ago when we met in Thailand because of our mutual admiration and support for King Rama IX of Thailand, and our understanding, based on our research, that the red shirts had ties to the Chinese Communist Party. You see a bunch of Asian mobs in Asia raising a red flag. China's behind it. They did it in Nepal. They tried it in Thailand, and thank God they failed. But here's a point I want to make about the Asian Society, and you can Google it, or it's on my Twitter feed, Maura Moynihan 1, and they published this outrageous statement. It's not that long. It's an act of cowardice that will come back to haunt them, and it says that we need to cooperate with China. Well, now more than ever, Sure, China made a few mistakes in the beginning, but the pandemic is everybody's problem now, and it's not helpful to criticize China. And besides, we depend on China for all of our medicines. So please, this isn't a time to pick on China. And look and scroll through the signatories. You'll see Republicans and Democrats, but in this crowd, mostly Democrats. Max Baucus, the former senator who was Obama's ambassador to China, Stapleton Roy, who was an ambassador to China, I believe a Republican, Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State for Bill Clinton. She's the first signatory. Well, these people should be ashamed of themselves. Well, they've left a trail, and I want all your listeners to keep score. Right, Michael? That's what we've been doing all these years, is keeping score, correct? Hello? You dropped out.
I'm sorry, Maura. You should be able to hear me now. I was trying to.
Oh, I can hear you, yeah.
I was trying to improve the sound and basically crashed the rocket while I was doing it. You shouldn't. I guess you should. You know what the pilots say when something's wrong with the aircraft is what the astronauts say. If it's still flying, don't push any buttons. And I was trying to improve the sound, and I pushed a button. I broke their rule.
That's okay.
And so, you know, the what's been going on here, for instance, threatening Taiwan, threatening Hong Kong. You know, the only free China, as you know, is Taiwan. Taiwan is free China. And that's what we need to start calling Taiwan. We need to start calling Taiwan. Well, some people have called it that for a long time, free China, because that's the real China, is Taiwan.
Yes. And next month, as the pandemic continues to infect people, to kill people, to destroy people's savings and business and lives, I want all your viewers to keep a close watch on who's apologizing for communist China and who isn't. I've seen a huge change in the attitudes towards communist China in England because, of course, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is in the ICU with the CCP virus. And we were all very disappointed with Prime Minister Johnson when he okayed the Huawei deal just about 2 months ago, which would give the Chinese Communist Party. Huawei, by the way, is run by the People's Liberation Army of the CCP. And that would give them control of Britain's internet. And that basically means, in our modern world, everything, everybody's emails, the banks, I mean, how the traffic lights work, it's catastrophic. Well, because the Prime Minister is in the hospital fighting for his life, some sources say, the Tory ministers have canceled the Huawei deal. And that's good news.
Whoa, they canceled it. I didn't hear that. When did they cancel it? When did they cancel it?
Just yesterday.
Oh, outstanding. I missed that. This is great news for amid all this terrible news. That's great news that they've canceled that with Huawei. That's outstanding. If you don't know what Maura's talking about, this is really important. Actually, I'll let you explain more, or I can do it. I'll let you do it.
No, you explain. You explain.
Well,
why Huawei Matters.
Oh boy. You know, during the siege at PolyU, by the way, in Hong Kong, Poly University, which is an incredible, you know, Hong Kong has some of the best universities in the world. There was a huge siege there, and I went in there right as the siege was ending. There was thousands of Molotovs and everything else. So we're in there, and I was live streaming through the night, and we came after the siege, and we came in, you know, the EOD was there cleaning out all this stuff, and we went into a Confucius Institute while I was live streaming. Everybody by now should know what Confucius Institute is. I and our team were warning about them since 2014. That they should be closed all over the world. And then we continued upstairs for hour after hour inside PolyU, and there was Huawei up there on one of the top floors. There it was, and those computers were humming away. It was unbelievable. Huawei is 5G technology that's sponsored by China, which is going to be their NSA, CIA, and DIA, and everything else all encapsulated to be able to spy on us at all times, everything. And the UK, who is one of our Five Eyes, if you don't know what that is, that's a group of our closest intelligence partners like Canada, UK, Australia, Kiwiland, and who else? Anyway, Five Eyes. And so but the problem is if UK were to adopt the 5G technology from China, I mean, that would break our intelligence relationship because it would be too easy to penetrate our networks as if it's not easy already. So this was a very serious stress. It was great that Boris Johnson was going for the Brexit. I was very happy for that. But then he went for 5G with Huawei, and that was really made us quite unhappy, to put it lightly. But now, wow, that's great news, Maura, that they've actually canceled that. That's really good news in the middle of all
Yeah,
this
they also have,
nastiness.
they've got to respond to public opinion as well, because the Queen Elizabeth made a very, very moving, very beautiful statement about having courage and hope. And this is only the fourth time in her extraordinary reign that she has addressed the British public in this way. The first time was, of course, during World War II, during the Blitz, when she and her family did not leave London. They and Winston Churchill stayed in London as the Luftwaffe was pounding the city. So I've always admired Queen Elizabeth, and I was very moved by her statement. And my friends in England, I have two friends whose husbands are on ventilators in London right now and are in a terrible state. So I've been talking to them, and they said, well, there was just so much anger about Boris Johnson being sick and about the Londoners being plucked one by one, like New Yorkers, plucked off the streets, plucked away from their homes, and thrown into a COVID hospital and near death. That I think the Huawei deal certainly wouldn't help the Tory government in the next round of elections. While we're on, I want to also tell your viewers this is very important. You can research Huawei. It's Huawei, and there's lots of info about it. But you also must be very wary. Do not use Zoom. Zoom is also run by the Chinese Communist Party,
Okay,
and so
let me
is
make
TikTok.
that clear what she just said. Zoom. Like in the last 24 hours, two people have wanted to do Zoom meetings with me. I'm like, no, I'm not doing a Zoom. Zoom. Zulu, Oscar, Michael. ZOOM. Don't use Zoom. I'm sorry, I interrupted, but I wanted to make sure they understood exactly what you were saying.
No, it's important. Michael's absolutely right. And you can just Google Zoom Chinese Communist Party. The Japanese government, run by Shinzo Abe, has just banned the use of Zoom in all government offices. In India, it's also banned. And all these friends of mine are Zooming all over the place, and they're using TikTok. Well, both of these services are controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. TikTok makes absolutely no secret of it. Zoom's trying to walk it back. They made a statement last week of, some of our data inadvertently got routed through China. Oh, really? Inadvertently. But TikTok comes from China. The CEO was being lauded by the New York Times last year. They did all these profiles of him, how brilliant and fabulous. So don't use TikTok and don't use Zoom unless you want to get your computers hacked. And right now, all the stores are closed, so you won't be able to get them fixed. And being a lifelong Tibet person, I know what it's like to get your computer hacked by the CCP, and it's not fun. Right, Michael?
Oh, yeah. Good Lord. Okay. Listen, some people are asking what more besides Zoom. And as Maura has said, TikTok. Now, what's very important is it's not just whether or not you have it or not, but if you've got children or your brother or sister or husband or wife or whatever, if they have it, you are hacked. I mean, that's just the way this goes. It's like if they have the virus, you've got the virus. If they're hacked, you're hacked. In fact, when I was in the wars with U.S. forces, often we were killing people, like killing them. I would be there when we would kill them because somebody with a phone that was hot, they would be beside our target. They would be with our target, right? So, I mean, it's that simple. We can turn on their phones, listen to what they're saying, that sort of stuff. So, I mean, if you're some important person and you run a big company in the United States that has something that they want or anything like that, they can just hack your kid. Your child has TikTok and 12 years old. Well, guess what? They can turn on his phone or whatever, her phone. They can follow you around when you're with your child, that sort of stuff. That's why you got to sanitize your house of all this stuff.
Yes, absolutely. No, and it's also very important to be aware that the CCP has for decades now implanted spies, assets. They bought up the all the elite institutions in the United States, Harvard University, the Asia Society. They've all got Columbia University. Yeah, I bet you they're all using Zoom and TikTok. But now is a time where you cannot rely on these universities and these institutions for guidance, because they're showing how nervous they are. That the letter from the Asia Society is clear proof that they are nervous. They don't want to lose control of the narrative, and and they're being pressured by China to keep everything going the way it was going. And only the American people can fight back. Only by vote. And also, you've got to vet all your candidates. This is an election year, and that's local, state, everything. Ask them if they think China should be punished for spreading coronavirus. There's another piece of information I want to share with your viewers. There are lawsuits all over the world now against the CCP for negligent homicide, for damages. There was a big one that came out of England a couple of days ago, something like £3 trillion for damages and negligent homicide. On American thought leaders, our friend Jan Jekielek, who's interviewed both me and Michael and Gordon, our friends, he had a lawyer on 2 nights ago, a very bright guy, who is suing the CCP for damages to the American economy.
I watched it, and I put it on Facebook too. Yeah, and he's a spokesman for the law firm, which happens to be in Florida, suing China.
And that law firm got a successful conviction on the drywall scandal, the Chinese drywall scandal of a few years ago, where American houses were made with this cheap junk from China that was toxic, and people died, or they acquired nervous disorders. And that was a big story. I mean, I just don't understand the whitewash. Those stories were out there, but they were actually only hanging out there in mainstream media for a minute and a half before they scrubbed them. And meanwhile, they're pushing this lie, this absolute fantasy of Russiagate. Russia's behind everything. Anyone who knows anything about the world will tell you that is not the case. Russia doesn't have TikTok. It doesn't have Huawei. It doesn't have Zoom. It doesn't control the United Nations. It didn't give $1 billion to Harvard University. Really, I have to stop listening to this Russiagate thing, which upsets a lot of my Russian friends who want cooperation with America. The Cold War has been over for a long time, thanks to the great hero, Mikhail Gorbachev, who also seems to be forgotten largely by historians. And he didn't free the Soviet Union to see the Communist Party triumph in China. He has said that. He was hoping that it would make the CCP come down. And that was also in the spring of 1989. We allowed the peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Union when the students in Tiananmen Square did the peaceful sit-in to honor Yu Yabong, who was a CCP reformer who was thrown into jail. And then Li Peng and Jiang Zemin and the boys in Beijing all came and slaughtered them. And what happened after that? Well, Papa Bush Sr. sent Brent Scowcroft, his national security advisor, to Beijing for a meeting with Jiang Zemin and Li Peng, all the top CCP cadres, and said, don't worry, we'll clean this up for you, and got them a contract with Hill and Knowlton. It's Hill, Knowlton, KNOWTLTON. It's a PR firm in Midtown Manhattan that has handled the CCP account since Tiananmen. They're very secretive. They have a website, but they do not list their clients like Kissinger Associates. If you sign up with Kissinger Associates, which also handles big business in China, you have to have a disclosure that you won't talk about it and so forth. They don't even have a website, Kissinger Associates, but I know where Kissinger's office is, right across from the wall there. So Hill and Knowlton has been spinning for the CCP, and I bet they're in overdrive now. So I would ask your viewers to write letters and go after Hill and Knowlton. So why are you representing a genocidal regime that has children in concentration camps and is destroying the world? These people need to hear it from Americans. It's harder for us to go after the boys in Beijing in the CCP, but we can go after their collaborators and appeasers right here on American soil. Right, Michael?
We can. I mean, we can go after them. I talked with a lawyer a couple of days ago about going after China. Some lawyers seem to think that we have to sue them in China and go by their laws. This is not how it works. How can a lawyer not know that? I mean, they've got huge amounts of vested interest in the United States, and they're quite vulnerable. So I mean, they,
Yeah, yeah.
and now's the time. As you know, Maura. I mean, you and I have lived around the world. The United States is a litigious society, and it really upsets us at times. But then when you live in countries, or you spend a lot of time in countries where you cannot file a lawsuit, realistically anyway, and get any recompense, it's actually a lot worse. And so China lives in that world where big businesses, the government, which is all piled in together, they can do anything that they want. But now we can change that. There's sovereign immunity. We can slice right through it. And now's the time, Maura.
Yes, well, there's an idea that I have. I was talking to some friends last night about these lawsuits and how to make them effective. Well, the CCP also owns a great many assets in the United States, in real estate. The Xinhua Tower in Times Square, my hometown of New York City, is worth at least $5 billion. And I remember the disgust and revulsion I felt 10 years ago when they built it. And you go to Times Square, it's considered the beating heart of America. It's got Broadway, it's got Rock Center, it's got everything. There's a Xinhua Tower. It's one of the tallest media towers in Times Square. And there's the evil logo of the murderous, genocidal Chinese Communist Party right there. And nobody seems to be upset but me and a couple of my Tibetan friends. Everyone's acting like it's normal. And that's the normalization of the CCP. Well, that building alone is worth in the billions. And I remember, again, it was about 10 years ago when this big expansion was starting of Chinese media in America. They built a $50 million headquarters in Washington, D.C. on New York Avenue. And I wrote articles and I tried to get senators to pay attention. I was, patted on the head and told to go get a life. Well, that's $50 million right there. A lot of rich Chinese have bought up swaths of real estate. The Chinese own AMC. They own several assets in Hollywood. I'm forgetting now which was the big studio they bought. Was it Paramount? I forget. But that's why you won't see any criticism of Chinese or negative portrayals of Chinese communists in Hollywood movies, because they had made a couple tough movies in the 90s, and they were going to put an end to that. So those Hollywood studios, that's a lot of real estate. So I think it's also very important to differentiate between your Chinese neighbor who has a Chinese restaurant and the evil CCP. Let's go after the CCP's assets and let's go hard. Correct?
By the way, Maura has a website, and I'm looking at it here. It's Maura Moynihan 1957.com. That's Maura Moynihan, Maura Moynihan, one word, 1957.com. It's really well worth looking at. Yeah, I mean, this is a huge undertaking. This is a new world, Maura. As you know, this is the biggest thing in anybody's life who's alive right now on a global scale. And this is actually, a lot of people are afraid, but others of us, we're embracing change. I mean, what else is there to do but embrace change? Because there's about to be a lot of dramatic changes, Maura.
Well, yes, and this is why this is a very perilous moment as well, because while the Western nations are overwhelmed with this just unforeseen and absolutely hideous, traumatic crisis of this virus, which is killing people by the minute, which has the Prime Minister of England on the ICU, which has our military infected. 500 New York City policemen have the CCP virus. 500 in America's largest city and our most important police force. Well, I'm hearing a lot from my friends in Indian intelligence, who always have the best news about what communist China is up to, and my other sources in Thailand and Japan, that it's the old Chi-Com playbook. While this crisis is unfolding, and by the way, they don't have it together on the ground in China, despite what the New York Times prints. They print no recorded new cases in China. There's a difference between recorded cases and actual cases. So they are already provoking military skirmishes all over Asia. They sunk a Vietnamese fishing boat last week. They were playing some dangerous war games with the Philippine army. They were making noises around Japan. They were doing stuff with the South China Sea Islands that they're building. And my friends in Indian intelligence said, looks like they're going to do a strike. They're going to do a hit. And they're going to try to draw the West in while the West is overwhelmed with the virus that they created, that they spread. Now, this is going to be a very scary moment. And that's why we really need to unite as Americans. I know I saw some comments last time I was on your show of one person was very exercised that I was defending President Trump from a snarky CNN reporter who was being rude and disrespectful. And I just want to clarify why I support the president at this time. I am a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. But my father, who served in the Navy in World War II, if he was alive, he would say, we all have to support the president. We all have to support whoever our president is. We're not living in a communist country. And we all need to come together as Americans. And I think the press corps, the CNN reporter was outrageous, the rudeness with which he was addressing the president of the United States, calling him a liar, calling him this and that. And I think that we don't need that kind of snarky gotcha stuff when we might find ourselves attacked by China in a second wave that would include a military attack. Remember last year, Michael, when there was an attack on an American pilot? They blinded an American pilot. The Chinese military blinded America. They did a lot of war games off the coast of Alaska. They have a lot of spies in Hawaii. What if they attacked Hawaii? What if we could see another Pearl Harbor? These things are not out of the question.
No, not at all. In fact, they're very much in the question because China is about to have they already have huge internal problems. Those internal problems are only going to grow as their economy collapses. I mean, our economy is collapsing. Mm-hmm. We can all see that. That's clear. And the world economy is collapsing, and China is dependent upon the world to sell their junk to. And so in mm-hmm. addition to them getting smashed internally, now their markets are smashed. And, the United States has 10 million people unemployed now, something around those numbers, not to mention what will happen to Europe and other parts of Asia. So yeah, China is in deep, deep trouble. Now, Maura, what happens when people get in deep trouble? They try to find somebody to divert attention to. For instance, let's say invade Taiwan or something along those lines to get people's attention off of what's happening.
Oh, yeah, that's the old Chi-Com playbook. In fact, one of the tragedies of China's occupation and annexation of Xinjiang and Tibet, which happened in 1950 and 1951, was China was very weak at that time. It was coming out of an exhausting civil war and World War II. And then the Korean War starts up. Well, it takes everybody's attention off their annexation of Tibet and Xinjiang, which doubled the landmass of the People's Republic of China. This history isn't, Harvard University will never let you teach this history because they'd take $1 billion from the Chi-Com. But I know it. I studied it. I wrote my master's thesis about it. And certainly a lot of English scholars have written about it. And now, in this time in history, there has never been an empire that the Middle Kingdom has ruled that is so vast. It goes from the tropical seas of Hong Kong to the Gobi Desert to the high Himalayas to Manchuria, all the way down to press on to Burma and Thailand. It's enormous. And India lost territory at that time with partition because India was partitioned into East and West Pakistan. So India loses territory around the same time that China doubles territory. And again, their successful campaign to keep people from really studying the history of their brutal and highly successful occupation of Tibet and Xinjiang is a tragedy because people are now seemingly surprised. They're supposed to be our friends. Don't we work with them? Gee, what about all those Confucius institutes? The Asia Society says we should work with them. No. The story of the annexation of Tibet by Communist China is a case study in how they lie. An old Tibetan man who wrote a wonderful book called Warriors of Tibet, which you could probably find, it's out of print. It's one of my favorite books. I wept through the whole thing, and he helped the Dalai Lama escape.
Written by a CIA, is it written by the CIA, ex-CIA agent? Or?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, there are the two other wonderful books are Ken Knauss's book, Orphans of the Cold War. He was a good friend of mine. He passed a couple of years ago. He trains the Tibetan guerrillas. And Michael Dunham's wonderful book, Buddha's Warriors. They're longer. This book is a short book, but it's an oral history of a man called Alo from eastern Tibet. And of course, the PLA came into eastern Tibet first. And there was a huge war in 1956 in eastern Tibet where the Tibetans put up a fight. They got slaughtered by larger numbers. And there was a mass exodus of refugees into central Tibet. And then 59 comes the flight of the Dalai Lama, and it's over. But he said, when the Chinese communists first came, we were concerned. They were not like the Chinese we had known before. They were atheists. They had a hard, cold, vicious ideology. They had all these new weapons. First, they came with smiles. Then they came with gold. Then they came with guns. And when they came with guns, we'd already taken the smiles and the gold, and they slaughtered us. And then he describes seeing the intestines of his 2-year-old daughter spill onto the ground as he gallops away towards safety, and a Chinese soldier puts a bayonet into his daughter's intestines. Yep, those are the Chi-Coms.
They're the most, if people want to imagine what would have been like if had the Nazis won in World War II, you don't have to imagine it. Look at China, right, Maura? I mean, seriously. There's a reason why Hong Kongers call them Chi-Nazis. You would see me live streaming out there in the fighting all the time for 6 months, and there would be graffiti all over the place from Hong Kongers calling them Chi-Nazis. And Hong Kongers, United States needs to stand beside Hong Kongers. They're fighting against this tooth and nail. I mean, it's literally like the little mouse standing up to a horrific beast, and they're doing it courageously, intelligently, and very perilously. And the United States must stand with Taiwan and Hong Kong. They are our soulmates in Asia. I mean, it's in Japan as well. And I mean, we really have got to stick with Japan and Taiwan and Hong Kong, who are standing up against China. And of course, Maura knows all about this.
Oh, yes. And I also, to all your listeners, I know it's a tough time for a lot of people economically, but try to support Michael, even $1, even $5 on his Patreon account. I'm a supporter of his work through Patreon, because you will not get better information anywhere than from Michael. He's on the ground in Asia. You can trust him more than CNN, MSNBC, all these other people. And the work he did in Hong Kong last year during the insurgency was absolutely critical. I was following him every single day, and you can go back and watch some of Michael's reports. The uprising in Hong Kong, now no one's talking about it because the CCP virus has eclipsed all other stories, but it's terribly important, very significant moment. I thought that the Hong Kong people, they showed the world what the CCP really is. And let's all back to the TikTok and the Zoom and why it's important, why you have to be careful on the internet. Well, the CCP just went completely crazy when that man from the Houston Rockets tweeted, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Of course, I was thrilled that they did, because we Tibet people have been screaming about that for years, and suddenly everyone realized just how crazy they are, and how hysterical and how rigidly communist their thinking is. Yes, they really are still communists. You always hear the line, "They're not really communists anymore. They wear Nike shoes and they drink Coca-Cola." I said, so what? They still have a one-party totalitarian dictatorship. But back to Hong Kong, there have been very alarming images coming out of Hong Kong while the virus is raging. Well, the CCP still has time for police brutality in Hong Kong. They're arresting leading citizens of Hong Kong society. Jimmy Lai is still in jail, along with 2 of his other compatriots. So they're hoping people aren't really paying attention to Hong Kong and got their hooks in. Michael tried to get back in. They didn't allow him. They stopped him at the airport. And so I worry about our friends in Hong Kong. They put up the most noble and extraordinary fight. Never in my life did I ever think the CCP would get such a fight right there in its backyard. Because, Tibetans stand up. There's no television. There's no 5-star hotels. There's no banks. They can all be slaughtered. And we get it out a few weeks later through Radio Free Asia. No witness. In Hong Kong, everybody was watching. And in Taiwan, everyone's seeing how well they did to contain the virus. And another story that seems to be getting a lot of traction, thank God, is how China controlled the World Health Organization and how they didn't listen to the doctors in Hong Kong in December talking about the virus. And Trump just said today he wants to defund the WHO. I think that would send a very good message, because that Ethiopian Marxist,
Absolutely,
that Maoist,
defund
he
world.
isn't even a doctor.
I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to second that. Defund the world. Let me let you keep going, Maura. I don't want to be impolite. I love you. So, but I just wanted to high five you on that. Defund the World Health Organization. Now, be quiet.
Yeah. And another very alarming development at the United Nations last week is that China got control of the Human Rights Council. That's like a Nazi getting control of the Human Rights Council. And we've called them China Nazis for years in the Tibet movement, because the way they torture people in Chinese prisons would make a Nazi proud. And all my years with Radio Free Asia, Kathmandu, we would interview Tibetans that managed to escape into Nepal. And so I collected years and years of torture stories and accounts of what went on in Chinese prisons. And we made a film called Fire Under the Snow about Palden Gyatso, a Tibetan monk who survived 33 years of torture in a Chinese prison just for the crime of being a Buddhist monk, which meant, according to Chicom law, he had bad class status. That's all it took for you to get an electric cattle prod put into your mouth, or to be hung upside down and beaten to death. And that's how they do it. And these are not criminals; these are just people. They kill you for your ethnicity, for your religion. They allowed Liu Xiaobo, the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, to die in 2017 in a Chinese prison for the crime of counter-revolutionary thought. Only one other government has done that, and that was the Nazis, when Count von Ossietzky won the Nobel Peace Prize and died in a Nazi prison. So yes, we can make parallels. And back to the WHO and back to the UN. Oh, another very sad story is in the 50s, Nehru was approached by the UN. They felt they wanted to have an Asian nation. And India was a democracy, in India's open society. And they asked, would you like to join the Security Council? And he said, well, I have to ask my friend Chairman Mao first. So he called Chairman Mao, and Chairman Mao said, of course, don't do that. Well, then the Dalai Lama comes fleeing into India in 1959. China strikes India in 1962 from the high ground. And it's considered one of the greatest wonders of history, was Nehru not taking the Chinese seriously, this Hindi Chini bye-bye, Chinese-Indian friendship, it was called. Because then, oh boy, China gets on the Security Council. China's been on the Security Council since 1972, I believe. And that was thanks to Kissinger, the Kissinger Doctrine. And so they have immense power in the UN, and they still don't pay as much as America pays. America still pays more than any other country. And why should we fund the WHO when they allowed this pandemic to said, let them go bust? I mean, I'm very sad to see the United Nations being so corrupted by this evil totalitarian dictatorship, when, as we know, the United Nations was created after the ashes of World War II, because of the Holocaust. And when my father was ambassador to the United Nations in 1975, 1976, the Secretary General, Kurt Waldheim, was later exposed as a Nazi. And he passed this anti-Semitic resolution, this Zionism is a form of racism resolution. And it passed. Why? Because the China bloc and the Soviet bloc worked together to pass it. The fascists and the communists always worked together. And my father gave the greatest speeches of his career at that time. And then he worked hard to have the resolution overturned, which it was in 1991. But the damage was done. The damage was done. So from that time on, I've always been very suspicious about the United Nations. It's been so penetrated by totalitarian fascist elements. And now we're seeing the price of that as people die every day. Right, Michael?
How much will we miss the United Nations or World Health Organization if they're gone? How much? Like zero, right? Does anybody miss the League of Nations? I mean, I'm going to miss them like I miss a malarial mosquito. I mean, they're sucking our blood, they're taking our money, and then they work against us. Why do we fund the UN at all other than to spy on them and keep their headquarters around? I mean, I don't see any reason, any value in keeping the United Nations or the World Health Organization. What have they done except, for instance, with the World Health Organization, in the worst pandemic possibly in human history because of what it's leading to at this point, they facilitated it by, for instance, covering up in the beginning and also denying that it was a pandemic. Meanwhile, people like us in January were saying, hey, this is serious. That's when Steve Bannon started his pandemic show. And in January, I was saying, hey, everybody buy masks. I was publishing that, buy mask now. And that was January.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, World Health Organization was like, not a big deal, you know. And we need to defund them, Maura.
Yes, I agree. I absolutely agree. I mean, this is too much. And I was watching very carefully, like you were, Michael, as the pandemic exploded in January. Dr. Tedros was flown to Beijing on a junket, and he had a banquet, probably had a nice after party, goodie bags, probably prostitutes, drugs, whatever, because that's how they roll. He sure looks like he enjoyed all the party favors. And he wasn't wearing a mask, and he was shaking hands with Papa Xi, and he gave a big hug to the Chinese woman who had previously been the director of the WHO. And it was Chinese pressure that put this fraud, Dr. Tedros, in the job. He isn't even a doctor. He doesn't even have a medical degree. He's responsible for 2 famines in his native Ethiopia. He's a complete Chi-Com stooge. And if you watch him speak, he's just so inarticulate. He's easily bought. What I was saying, I was talking to a friend in intelligence the other day about all this. And what's really sad about this story that I want your viewers to know, and there are some brave people who've written books about it that can be found. I have many friends in intelligence who have taken the China threat seriously, but they said they can never get resources. They don't get resources allocated, because Chinese penetration. And they also said, it's kind of depressing to think of how easily they bought all these people. It wasn't even that much money. Buying off the WHO was a few million here and there to crash the whole world economy and possibly infect 60 to 80% of the world's population. I mean, 60 Minutes for a while was doing some very good reportage of Chinese agents buying guys in the Pentagon and military contractors. And they did a series of very good stories, but maybe due to Chinese pressure, that producer got fired because they stopped. But you can go on the internet, you can go on YouTube and Google Chinese espionage in America and Frontline's done pieces. But, some of these cases, like the military contractors, they bought these people off for $250,000, to give nuclear secrets. It's just incredible. And all these other guys, these UN bureaucrats, they get bought off by junkets, by hookers, by gifts, and academia. That's how they get bought. Oh, another case I'd like to bring up, which is hit now off the front pages. Just as the pandemic broke, there was a huge scandal involving Harvard University, my alma mater, with Dr. Charles Lieber, who was the head of the chemistry department, who was also in the exalted class of university professor. There's the highest of the high are the university professors, and they pick and choose a few from every discipline. He was a university professor. Well, he got arrested in Cambridge for spying for the Chinese Communist Party and for having a laboratory in Wuhan that the Chi-Coms built for him, an apartment in Wuhan, $5 million in gifts from the Chi-Coms, and he was helping develop biological weapons. That story disappeared pretty quickly. I cut and pasted it. He's in jail, and I was very proud of the FBI agents who arrested him. They gave a press conference, which is probably on YouTube. And these are just the regular working stiffs of this world who don't get paid a lot. These are not the exalted Harvard professors or the Asia Society crowd or the diplomats. They know what's going on. They know the score with the Chi-Coms. Well, that story's disappeared. However, he is in jail, and it exposed how much Chinese intelligence has penetrated our universities, to say nothing of the think tanks. And what about our intelligence agencies? It's mind-boggling, but Rachel Maddow and CNN and the New York Times would have you believe that it's all Russia, 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 Russia. Don't buy it, everybody. Right, Michael?
Absolutely. I mean, the Chinese intelligence. I mean, as you know, the more intelligence that you have, the more ability to spy. For instance, through Zoom or just through just so many ways that they have Confucius Institutes, Huawei, all so just there. That's how you can control basically everything that you want. I mean, for instance, with 5G, they'll be able to do so many sorts of, little compromising information that they can find to, oh, wow. So, you send an email to so-and-so and splitting apart marriages and down to the nuclear level they can do. You know what I'm saying? Down to, there's so many things that you can do with extreme intelligence, not just hitting people with missiles or something, but putting people into compromising positions or finding out what makes them tick, and then basically fashioning a key to get into their door, to their psychological door. It's super simple, and the Chinese are very good at it. The Russians, we used to think were good at it, but they're nothing compared to the Chinese, right?
Yes. Oh, you know, I have a lot of Russian friends in India, Nepal, and Thailand, and they all say the same thing. They say, "God, why is America so obsessed with Russia?" And Putin's a tough guy, but he is not Stalin. We have a semi-open society, and Putin isn't trying to be the global hegemon that Xi Jinping is. They don't have a Belt and Road Initiative project. And a lot of my Russian friends say they want trade with America, cooperation with America. They don't have any enmity towards America, and they don't. Well, there is, of course, it's documented that Hillary Clinton and John Podesta cooked up the Russiagate narrative on election night in 2016 when they lost to Trump, because they had to blame someone. She couldn't take responsibility for running a terrible campaign and being someone that nobody wanted to vote for. So that's been well documented by people who were covering her campaign, who were reporters on the ground. But I see the New York Times pushing it with this impeachment thing, this insane impeachment thing, locked up Americans for weeks and weeks and weeks while the pandemic was spreading. And then when I hear my neighbors go, Trump did this, Trump made this happen, I want to slap their faces. Because no, he didn't. The worst person in American government, whoever that may be, did not create this coronavirus. But the New York Times would have you feel otherwise. And the Washington Post just had a big story of like all the mistakes that the American government made. Well, which side are they on? Again, it's what you were saying, Michael, the influence game that the Chinese run. They have the 1,000 grains of sand policy, which I can explain for your viewers, which I'm sure you know. And again, if you're at home and you want to learn more, you can also download or read online The Art of War, the 6th century BC text. It's not very long. Every year on Tibetan New Year, I used to read the whole thing. But, there's a lot of info in there about how to play dirty. Not how to play fair, but how to play dirty. And the first chapter is the best way to win a war is without pulling your sword. You make the enemy die first. Well, that's how they think. And I remember when I worked for Radio Free Asia in 2000, we got a white paper that got leaked out of Beijing, where they said, the country that we intend to go to war with is America, but we're not going to do it through conventional kinetic war. We're going to do it from the inside. We're going to penetrate with, everything you were just saying, Michael, which they're doing. I mean, I encourage people also to watch this movie that the Epic Times guys, Jan Kellick is one of the producers, called Claws of the Red Dragon. Bannon's a producer too.
Claws of the Red Dragon is great. Yeah, that's important to watch.
It's great.
Watch that.
Yeah, tell your viewers about it. It is great.
Well, I'll talk about The Art of War, actually. I've read it, I don't know how many times, but I've studied it because, when you're in SF, Special Forces, that's one of those books that a lot of people read. But actually, interestingly, as over time, when I've had to fight copyright fights or whatever, you might have seen, I bankrupted a magazine called Shock Magazine.
Yes, I remember.
Or when people like
good for you.
And when Telegraph did one story, 2 big military scalps for Michael Yon when I went after 2 generals simultaneously, and a lot of people have wondered how I did these sorts of things in my little position and was able to really take on many, not just those times, but it's really I'm just following precepts that I've read from Art of War and On War by Clausewitz. It's just all these. I'm using philosophies that were developed so long ago, and when I fight, I just use those old philosophies. They're incredibly effective. Anyway, so I'm not surprised, Maura, that you have been reading The Art of War over the years. That's why you're so. No wonder we binded so quickly when we first met. I had no idea you also were a student of The Art of War. Well, I can see by your actions that you are, but I didn't know from that book in particular.
Yeah. Are you kidding? Because in the Tibet movement, we never had any resources, and we were up against the world's most vicious and armed to the teeth and cruel adversary. And so one of the only things we felt we could do, as my father always said about my Tibet work, if you cannot prevent a genocide, you can at least expose it. And so I thought being a reporter working with Radio Free Asia was far more effective than advocacy, because we were just getting it down, getting the record. And we wanted to know how they thought, and we wanted to know what would motivate them. And so I spent years and years reading Chinese military blogs. I read Xinhua, I read China Daily, I read Chinese propaganda. The Chinese propaganda about Tibet is the most insane. It's so ludicrous. They stopped a few years ago, but for many years they called the Dalai Lama, this gentle monk, a man of peace, 85-year-old monk who lives in exile in India. They call him, right on the Chinese Foreign Ministry website, an incestuous cannibal who drinks buckets of human blood and eats 80 human heads for breakfast every day in his military encampment in India. That's verbatim. That's verbatim. And I would tell this to people in American policymakers and elites and stuff, the people that I know and grew up with, and they would kind of shrug and go, "Oh, that's too crazy." Who said that? I said, the Chinese government said that. And then sometimes you'd see an anxious pause. They go, "Really?" I said, "Yes, that's how crazy they are." And they say it with no shame. So now they've toned that down. In recent years, they called the Dalai Lama a monk in wolf's clothing. They still call him incestuous, but they don't call him a cannibal. They call him an incestuous spy. I mean, really. But, again, the reason they got away with silencing the Tibetans and making people not pay attention and not meeting the Dalai Lama and all those things is that my father once described to me a CODEL, a congressional delegation of senators, to Washington in the early 90s. And it was shortly after Tiananmen. And that was the moment when people were...
Maura said Code L. Code L is a... Can you explain what that is? We used to do them in the Army when senators would
come. It means congressional delegation. It means a congressional delegation, a CODEL. And I have friends who are staffers for senators who got to go on CODELs to Europe, Asia, Africa. In fact, when Dad was senator, he was on the Foreign Relations Committee, and several of his staffers, we sent them on CODELs to India to meet the Dalai Lama and to talk to the Tibetan refugees and to the torture survivors, just so it would be on the radar screen. But a lot of CODELs, you get wined, you get dined and all that stuff. So Dad went on this CODEL with my mother, and their meetings with the Chinese officials. And of course, this was the kind of man he was. He raised Tibet. And he raised the issue of the concentration camps in Tibet.
Your father raised Tibet. That must have made him nuts.
Of course. But no, he always did. And pretty much 3 times a year, he would always get a threatening letter from the Chinese ambassador, threatening, dire consequences if he didn't stop talking about Tibet. And what my father would do is he'd give a press conference and he'd read the letter out loud. And again, the tortured language of these Chinese communists, the propaganda, and sometimes they would get guffaws from the press corps. But he'd say, they're threatening me again. And so I'd like to invite the ambassador to my office to discuss the matter of Tibet and discuss the matter of the concentration camps. But I haven't had a reply. So you got to stand up to bullies. That's the thing. And so I'm getting to the story that illustrates why they get away with having concentration camps and torturing children and forced organ harvesting. When he raised the issue of Tibet, and 2 of his staffers who were there at the CODEL said the Chinese started screaming wildly. They go from seemingly being fairly normal to they start shrieking at the top of their lungs and pounding the table. And then they point fingers and they go, you had Indian reservations. You Americans have no right to tell us what to do in our country. And my dad said it was very disappointing. The other senators all folded their cards immediately. Went, oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, we'll never discuss Tibet. And my father said, true to his form, yes, we did have Indian reservations and we did have slavery. And yes, it was shameful, but we don't have them anymore. And that was the 19th century. And just because we had them doesn't make it right for you to have them. Doesn't make it right for you to torture children in concentration camps. And of course, my dad's staffer said they were just completely flummoxed because no one ever talks back to them. And the Chinese delegation just went, they gasped. Because you kick a bully, he'll shut up. Right?
Exactly right.
Exactly
right. No, exactly right. For instance, Chinese students down in Australia or the United States, up in Canada, over in Kiwi land as well, when Hong Kongers or Taiwanese or Japanese say something, they'll get violent with. And then a lot of people go, oh, there's the Japanese and Chinese fighting again. No, it's not. It's Chinese attacking Japanese. It's Chinese attacking Taiwanese. It's Chinese attacking Hong Kongers. It's not two to tango. It's one. This idea that it takes two to tango is completely false. It only takes one attacker to tango. And China has been using violence for years in universities around the world. But you'll see it in the newspaper. It'll be headlines or stories. It'll be, Hong Konger and mainland students fighting in some university somewhere. No, when you really look at it, it's mainland Chinese agents attacking the Hong Kongers or Taiwanese or Japanese every time.
Yeah, of course. I would like to share a story with your audience about a lovely young friend of mine, my friend Se-Hoon Kim. Se-Hoon is of Korean descent. He's an American citizen. He was in the Army Reserves, and he is studying at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, which used to be one of the finest R&D scientific universities in the world. Developed maglev trains and others. All of this technology got stolen, went to China. Anyway, he tried to organize a little conference, again, like our Tibet conference at Columbia University, last year on the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, Hong Kong, Taiwan, what I would call the Periphery Project, which is the outside of mainland China, the areas where they strike hard. And the Chinese Students Association demanded that it be shut down, tried to sue him, threatened him and his fellow organizers with physical violence, and they even got the dean of students, Dean Matt Burns, remember that name, we're coming for you, Dean Burns. They had meetings with him and got recordings of him saying, well, you're really upsetting the Chinese students. We have to think of the Chinese students first. They're so important to us. You're going to make things difficult for them. And they asked, well, what about American students? They're threatening us with violence. Which side are you on? And Dean Burns kept, waffling and quaffling. And then when the Hong Kong protests also were escalating last fall, there was a part of the campus where a group of students from Hong Kong and their American friends painted a beautiful mural, Free Hong Kong. Well, the next morning, the Chinese Students Association came and painted it over. And so this was also reported to the administrators at Rochester University, kept waffling, because 60% of the undergraduate body are Chinese nationals. Again, educating the sons and daughters of the Chinese Communist Party. And the students from Hong Kong and from Taiwan and Japan, as you said, Michael, they were very upset by this. And some of the local press reported the story accurately. But then a woman from NBC News, with their close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, came up and started poking around. And people were saying to her, whoa, Se-Hoon and all these people, they're dangerous, they're destructive, they're harmful to our university culture. Not that, never mind the Chinese Communist Party, an American student who served in the armed forces, he's the problem. Wow. There are lots and lots and lots of stories like this. The Chinese will go to any length to silence anyone who says the words Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and torture and concentration camps. I mean, some friends of mine had little films about Tibet in like local film festivals, and the Chinese consulate, four thugs would show up and threaten the film festival organizer. And in many cases, the film festival organizer will fold their cards, like Harvard University and Age Society. But in some cases, they'll say, "No, fuck you. We're gonna show the film." Again, you got to stand up to bullies. And right now, I predict in the next 2 months, 3 months in America, as the damage, the trauma, the death toll of the CCP virus increases, and it's traumatizing all of us. All of us have friends who are sick. All of us have lost work or see friends work. All of us fellow Americans die. Well, in your communities, look around. Is there a China Daily News box on the corner? There should be. There in every single corner of Washington, Boston, and New York. Kick it over, deface it. See if you see Chinese propaganda
Okay, Maura,
in your local paper.
I want to say something. People keep asking me like what they should do in regard to stuff like that. And of course, I'm saying, of course, I'm never advising you to vandalize the, Confucius Institute. I would never do that. Read The Art of War.
Oh, really?
I'm just saying, use your imagination. I'm not
saying,
you know what I'm saying?
Emotional.
No.
Oh, I've done it.
No.
I've done it. I've poured ink.
I totally agree with you. I'm the master of subversion and sabotage. So I'm just saying, I'm not publicly advising that. That's all.
No, I understand what you're saying, but but they've got to realize that people are on to their game now. And a new poll, did I already discuss this? Interrupt me if I did. A new poll came out this morning that showed like 88% of Republican voters believe that China is responsible for the pandemic, but only like 69 or 68% of Democrats believe it. Well, that's proof of their intelligence operation, the normalization of Xinhua and China Daily and Chinese propaganda. They're blaming the American government for this. And so, I mean, it should be 100% of Americans. 100 should, because another thing I want to point out to all of your listeners, if you're listening to Michael, you're in the fight. God bless you. And don't forget, support Michael's work. Go to his Patreon account. I don't have a Patreon account. Give it to Michael. But now, if you're listening and you're in the fight, and make no mistake, we're at war. The Chinese Communist Party has declared war on the world. They've brought the world to its knees. So the next few months, they're going to do every trick in their book to try to gain the upper hand. And don't think they can't win. They play dirty, they play foul, and they have won up till now. So it's very, very important when people start blaming the U.S. government, they blame Trump. My neighbor was blaming Governor Cuomo of New York. He didn't act fast enough, blah, blah, blah. Shut them up immediately. Shut them up immediately. And because we're not alone in this fight now. We have England, France, Italy, Spain, India, Japan. We've got a lot of countries now who are all angry at the Chinese Communist Party, who all have lawsuits going against the Chinese Communist Party. This is not a time to slack off and hope someone will take care of it. Here in America, all of us, we still have the power of the pocketbook, of the pencil, and of the voting booth, things that people in China don't have. They can't vote. It's a group of old men behind a curtain in the Politburo that decide the fate of 1.4 billion people who have no free press and no elections, which is shocking. And they've been built up by the West. They've been built up with the Kissinger doctrine and the Clinton doctrine, the Obama doctrine. The whole thing goes on and on and on. So be aware of the narrative. Be aware that China is guilty. Be aware they're going to try to spin the narrative. And they could also, God knows what they could do. They have a lot of people working for them. That letter from the Asia Society published, it was very, very disturbing to me that they would get all these people to apologize for China at a time like this when our fellow New Yorkers are dying, are dying. Oh, I'm going to do a protest in front of the Asian Society of New York when this cools down and we can go back out on the street. You can be goddamn sure I'll be out there with my Tibetan flag. But people just, you have to take action also by going online. Read the U.S.-China Business Council website. Sign up for their daily email. I get it every morning. They're spinning Chinese propaganda. Go on Hilton Knowlton. Write to your congressmen. Write to your senators. They do pay attention to letters from constituents. Petitions, not so much. I never sign petitions. My father said that Senate offices ignore petitions. But a personal letter from a constituent is, they have people on Senate offices who do the mailroom, whose full-time job is mail to the congressman's office, the senator's office, and ask about China's culpability. Ask about why we are not going after the assets of the Chinese Communist Party in this country. Can we seize their assets? Can we seize the Xinhua Tower in New York? Can we seize the Xinhua headquarters in Washington? I'm sure they got tons in California too. What steps can we take to prevent further infiltration of our society by the Chinese Communist Party? I think I'll write sort of a sample letter, Michael, you can put out on your website and people can sort of cut and paste it. And you can add a few things if you want. But senators and congressmen pay attention. This is going to be a campaign issue. I mean, how can it not be? But they're going to try. I've heard that the Chinese intelligence operation here is doing everything it can to try to rig the election. Don't think they won't, right?
Absolutely. I want to say something quickly, though. Maura is soon going to have my page. We're setting up right now so that she can just come on anytime she wants. Listen, she's, for everything you've heard now, she's got like 1,000 times more in her head to talk about. It's unbelievable. That's why I bug her all the time.
Thank you.
I mean, so we're setting up now so that Maura can just come on anytime she wants. And then you can ask Maura directly, and then you just won't believe. I mean, she can just talk for hours on, like, you can go down some tiny little trail. You'll think, oh, it's a small trail. It's an easy question. And then the next thing you know, opens up to this giant room of information that she's got in her head. So we're going to get it set up so that Maura can talk as long as she wants, which I'll stay up. You know me, Maura. I'll keep you up until you're like, Mike, I got to go to bed now.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, because the mainstream media will never book me. I had a friend, my friend Jessica, at
That's
ABC
because you're
News.
too hardcore.
Yeah.
You're too hardcore.
Yeah, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. Jessica would put me on ABC. We went on 2008 with Paul Gyatso talking about the concentration camps in Tibet. But she's retired. And, you know, I've got friends who work at all these networks. And when the pandemic broke, I called them and said, will you please book me to talk about the Chinese Communist Party? Well, they didn't even have the courtesy to call me and go, I'm sorry, we can't. They just ignored me. They didn't even answer. I was pretty disgusted. And they still have Chinese Communist propagandists on every night. So be aware of that. Be aware of that. And the New York Times, of course, takes color page ads. But the things that you can do from home with your computer is, one, no Zoom, no TikTok. We have to repeat that. And tell all your friends. Write to your representatives. Write to your governors. It doesn't take long. We have such low voter participation in this country. It's something that always broke my father's heart. We've got just 30% voter participation in America when you include non-presidential years, Michael. It's that bad. And I used to try to do voter reg drives all over New York. And, you know, what you hear from people all the time is, oh, I don't want to, why bother to vote? My vote doesn't count. Oh, really? I think the Chinese Communist Party wants you to feel that way. They don't want you to vote because then they can get politicians they control. I mean, there was a very, very alarming story with the Democratic National Committee taking money from a Chinese arms dealer. And in his first year in the White House, Big Bill Clinton, I think it was actually, he'd only been in it, like it was March. Yeah, he'd just been inaugurated. He'd only been in president for 2 months. He hosted 4 top Chinese arms dealers from the People's Liberation Army in a private lunch at the White House. At the White House. My father gave a press conference and said this was an outrage. This is jeopardizing our national security. And some snarky reporter said, Well, what's wrong with that? Can't the president have lunch with anyone he wants? And my dad said, oh, I suppose everybody has Chinese arms dealers to lunch, don't you? The reporter shut up. But I mean, they've been playing this game for a long, long time, and it is very scary now with the pandemic raging through our society, causing economic carnage and death and trauma in our society. Don't think they don't have their assets in the ground, ready to hit and ready to go. And we should ask the U.S. government to allocate more resources for intelligence to take out Chinese assets in our society. And their legion. What Dr. Charles Lieber of Harvard is in a jail cell in Boston tonight. Just Google him. Charles Lieber, Lieber.
Why is he in jail?
It's an incredible story.
Maura, why is Charles Lieber in jail?
He's the gentleman I spoke of earlier. He was head of the chemistry department, and the Chinese Communist Party for years provided him with several $1 million, an apartment in Wuhan, a laboratory in Wuhan, and he would just tell the people at Harvard, oh, I'm just going to China for research, But then they found out that he was on their payroll.
It's
Wuhan
been huge news. If he's guilty of this, he needs to stay in jail for the rest of his life.
Well, unfortunately, with the pandemic, the trial couldn't go forward because of the lockdown, but he's in jail. Dr. Charles Lieber of Harvard University, head of the chemistry department of Harvard, is in jail. Google it, people. It happened in January, just as the pandemic broke. And boy, oh boy, have they covered that story up. I do a search on it. I don't see any reporting about it. I don't see any reporting about it now. You can be sure that he's got Chi-Com lawyers who are trying to get him out. Who knows? Maybe he will be. But those FBI agents who arrested him had very solid evidence, and they seemed like very good guys. But, you just, again, while you're at home, don't just watch reruns of your favorite movie. Google Chinese espionage in America. You will see years and years of thousands of stories. They don't get reported much, but they're in our court system. I followed this very carefully, the number of convictions of people like Dr. Lieber, Americans working for the Chinese, or Chinese nationals working for the Chinese Communist Party, or people who immigrated from China and were our American citizens who got caught stealing nuclear secrets.
Uh-oh. I'm lost Maura. Oh, no. I seem to have lost Maura. Can you hear Maura? I cannot hear Maura. I don't know if Maura can hear me. Let me hang up and call her back. Call her right back. Sorry about that. So you can see why I love to have Maura on. Okay, Jan, I'm calling her back. And Jan, you asked some important questions. I wanted to answer them, but I didn't want to interrupt Maura. And as you can hear, it's trying to ring. It's not actually ringing. We may have lost Maura. Oh, goodness. Well, if we did, Margot wanted to know about let's try a different one here. I think we seem to have lost connection. Yeah, it says Maura is unavailable. Let's try again. But Margot also wanted to know about what supplies to buy. Oh, there we go.
Hi, Michael.
We lost you, but you're back. All right,
Hello?
So you're live. You're live on air again.
Back.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Just Google Chinese communist espionage infiltration, and you will see so many stories. They go so underreported, but they are in the court dockets, and it's jaw-dropping. And you will not see this about Russian agents. But if you listen to Rachel Maddow and you read the New York Times, you would think Russia is actually doing what China's doing. But they take ad dollars from China. They thought this through really carefully. One source of mine says that.
Oh, we lost Maura again. Goodness. Maura, are you there? Uh-oh, lost her again. I tell you what, we should probably go ahead and cut this then for now. And I'll go ahead and hang up. And we lost Maura. Al, is it still freezing even when Maura's not on? Maybe we should go ahead and cut it. Margot wanted to know more about what supplies to buy. Let me say very quickly, on for instance, on food, on water, and those sorts of issues, one of the smartest things to do is to look up prepper videos on YouTube. And because you need to check, first of all, your geographical location, right? And because, people in different parts of the country have different, in different parts of the world, have different needs for preparation. If you're in Alaska versus Key West, it's vastly, versus Germany versus here in Thailand, it's vastly different, right? And also, whether you live, say, in a big city like Los Angeles downtown, or you live on an island, Bermuda or something, it's very different, preparation needs. And so check your, if you live in a huge apartment complex somewhere in a big city in Tokyo, let's say in Tokyo, then your preparation needs are vastly different than somebody that lives out on a farm in Wyoming. And so on that, what foods to get and that sort of thing, Margot, look on YouTube, look for preppers in your financial and geographical location and your type of needs, whether you're urban or rural or that sort of thing. Also, age group can make a big difference because some people are older or younger, and that can make a difference on how you prep, for obvious reasons. So, all right. And we're going to get Maura back on. Actually, I'm going to set her and Al Johnson up so that Al and Maura can come on whenever they want without me, because they always have really important things to say. And often if they have to go through me, it never gets up there because I'm, I've got so many things going on here. And so the resolution is low, Al is saying. All right, so there's Al Johnson. Al Johnson, actually, I'm going to hang up soon, and I'm going to call you up, Al, about getting you on this channel. Let's see, what is Weishan saying? Oh, that's unfortunate with the broadcast issues. Did you see my message on the last broadcast about bitter winter and the PLA testimonials? Would have wanted to ask more about that too. Weishan, negative. I did not see it. But if you can save that, she'll come back on, and then, man, once you unpack Maura's memories and knowledge, it's like unpacking something. It's just amazingly, she's amazing. And so is Al Johnson, by the way. He's another one of those big brain people. There he is, Al, right there. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and hang up for now. Thank y'all. Weishan saying, strange, might be localized. Over in Western Australia, the picture quality is fine. Actually, Al, different people in the United States are telling me that they're having problems with internet for whatever reasons. And so, as you know, in some places in the United States, the internet's almost like Pony Express time still, whereas you go to Korea and it's like ultra fast internet. And here in Thailand, it's quite good as well, but Korea's got like crazy good internet, and Hong Kong's pretty good as well. But the United States, it's vastly hit and miss. It's been a while since I've been back to the United States, but I remember the quality is, and these are sorts of things I check online sometimes, like which countries are doing better with internet and communications, because this is a huge difference on how well our economies can work. When people are spending just an extra 2 minutes a day, let's say, on waiting for stuff to download. Now, multiply that by, hundreds of millions of man days. You know what I mean? That's a lot of wasted time. So investing in fast and very good communications is vital. There goes my dog, Barney, barking at something. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for supporting my work. And let me go see what my dog, Barney, is up to. And then I'm going to talk to Al about getting him on here live. And as for now, Mike out.